1,000 more are missing. The quake left the landscape of two major cities scarred by fires, twisted roads and crumpled buildings. As the ground shook, homes, offices and bridges came crashing down. Fireballs ballooned across the rubble. One eyewitness said he thought it was the end of the world. Tonight, fires are still burning and survivors are without water, power or transport. The epicenter of the earthquake, which measured 7.2 on the Richter scale, was just off the Pacific coast of Japan, close to the country's industrial heartland. The port of Kobe was devastated, and there was severe damage to Osaka, Japan's second biggest city, and Kyoto, the old imperial capital. Tokyo, 300 miles north, felt only slight tremors. Our Asia correspondent Caroline Kerr reports from Kobe.
For 24 hours, the city of Kobe has been ablaze. The emergency services can't control the flames. They're praying for rain. This was the moment the quake struck, a shockwave lasting 1 minute. Tremors swept through southern Japan just before dawn, just before the rush hour. A little later, and the roads would have been crowded with commuters. A mile-long section of the Hansin Expressway linking Kobe to Osaka had simply buckled and collapsed. One bus teetering on the brink, its driver and passengers inches from death. They were built to withstand quakes, but this one, 7.2 on the Richter scale, proved too violent. Cars and lorries were crushed where they stood. Their drivers had little chance of survival. Others were tossed about like toys. The port area of Kobe, built on reclaimed land, was the hardest hit. Power, water and gas supplies all cut, and there was worse to come. Fires, fueled by ruptured gas mains, making rescue work all the more hazardous. The infrastructure was all but destroyed. Trains derailed as the tracks buckled. The rail system was modern, designed like everything else they thought, to withstand quakes. They never expected this. More than 8,000 buildings in Kobe stand in ruins. There's damage elsewhere in Japan's second city, Osaka. And in the ancient imperial capital of Kyoto, cultural treasures have also been destroyed. In Kobe, the search for survivors was desperate and often in vain. Others surveyed the piles of rubble which hours ago were their homes, calling out for survivors. This quake had been the latest and most devastating of a series of tremors. But major quakes were expected to strike Japan's northern reaches, not here. Survivors were pulled by police and troops and passers-by from the rubble. They had suffered terrifying injuries, crushed bones, lacerations and shocked. They counted themselves lucky to be alive. The city of Kobe had grown prosperous this century. Many moved here after the great Japanese quake of 1923. Now their grandchildren and great-grandchildren can only survey the same devastation. Luckily, the tidal waves which often accompany the earthquake didn't happen this time. The main problem now is the fire advancing through the heart of the city, feeding on the old classical Japanese wooden buildings for which Kobe was famous, and destroying everything in its path. The hospitals and medical centres are swamped with casualties. Rescue teams from all over the world are en route, but for now they're being treated on stretchers in corridors, even on mattresses laid on the floor. It's now more than 24 hours since Japan's worst earthquake in half a century struck the town of Kobe. Countless victims still lie buried in the rubble, as the world's most technologically advanced nation struggles to come to terms with a natural disaster on such a huge scale. Caroline Kerr, ITN, Kobe.
Japan has always prided itself on its earthquake precautions. So why did this one cause such massive destruction? Here's our science editor, Lawrence McGinty.
The Japanese quake was so powerful, it registered and was heard on the other side of the world at the Geological Survey in Edinburgh. Scientists in Japan had predicted a big one following weaker tremors 2 weeks ago. But that's cold comfort to the thousands made homeless by the disaster. The scientists simply couldn't say exactly where and when the quake would hit. But tremors in Japan are no surprise. About half the world's earthquakes occur in or around Japan. The country sits at the junction of 3 massive tectonic plates, the Eurasian plate, the Philippines and the Pacific plates. The latter 2 are diving under the Eurasian plate, but not smoothly. It's like 2 pieces of sandpaper grating together. The jerks are earthquakes. Minor tremors are almost a daily event in Japan. Even the newscasters stay cool when the quakes hit. The biggest was in 1923 when 140,000 people died. Every year on the anniversary of that disaster, millions of Japanese take part in exercises to rehearse how they'd avoid the consequences of a quake. And Japan is a world leader in spending on research into earthquakes, £70 million a year. Japan has pioneered new engineering techniques for protecting buildings against the ravages of earthquakes.
The building codes that we use in California they're meant to design very economical buildings, so we don't spend a lot of money up front, and as you can see in the last few earthquakes in California, we end up paying a lot of money in repairing. The Japanese, on the other hand, have a different school of thought. They tend to make their buildings stronger initially in the hopes of minimizing repairs after a large event.
All new buildings in Japan must pass the earthquake protection laws. This means including seismic isolators, a kind of spring between the base of the building and the ground. The isolator is made up of layers of rubber and steel. When the ground moves, these layers absorb the shock, causing minimal movement to the building itself. Tests prove that an ordinary building in an earthquake rapidly becomes unstable and starts to crumble. But with shock absorbers, the structure is isolated from the force of the quake. However, it's impossible to fit these absorbers to old buildings, like the vast majority of those in Kobe. Elevated motorways too are supposed to be earthquake resistant. They weren't in Kobe. They're made up of prefabricated sections, each supported by a column of concrete reinforced with steel rods. Those are designed to bend several feet without buckling. The road itself, with its interlinked sections, should twist like a snake without breaking up. But in this case, the power of the quake was simply too strong. As Japan recovers from this disaster, the searchlight is bound to focus on whether the country's strategy for surviving earthquakes needs a...
The city of Kobe was devastated. Fires are still burning and they're out of control in many parts of the city. The infrastructure lies in ruins. The main highway in the area was meant to be quake-proof. Rescue work has been continuing throughout the night. Howell Jones in London has been monitoring the latest pictures from Japan.
In the last few